What's going on, gardeners? It's Saturday, January 21st, and a new growing season is upon us here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. On today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 terrible pieces of garden advice often given to new gardeners that you should avoid like the plague. We're going to explain why it's bad, commonly given advice, and why it will only slow you down if you're trying to start your first vegetable garden. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon storefront and spread shop in the video description for a list of the gardening products I use and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you're fairly new to vegetable gardening, or if you've never had a vegetable garden before and you want to try your hand at one, it can be very intimidating beginning. That's because there's so much information out there that you may not know where to begin, and furthermore, so much of it is so complicated. To make matters even worse, so many of the very experienced gardeners out there are some of the worst people to give advice to new gardeners because they forget what it was like to be new at this game. So for that reason, a lot of the advice is overly complicated. So what I want to do on this video is talk about 5 commonly given pieces of advice for new gardeners that experienced gardeners give that are actually terrible, and break things down so we can keep things simple for you so you will be as successful as possible as a newbie. The number one worst piece of garden advice often given to new gardeners is to be 100% organic. Yes, you heard me correct. The worst thing you can be right out of the gate is a completely organic gardener. That's because there are so many rules that you need to understand and follow to truly be a completely organic gardener. And in the beginning, you just need to focus on keeping your plants alive. So that means you need to focus on nailing the timing, keeping them fertilized, and making sure they don't succumb to pests and diseases. Those are the 3 things you should be focusing on, not being a completely organic gardener. Now look, the long-term goal of every gardener should be to be as natural and organic as possible, but that's not something that you should do up front. Just worry about keeping your plants alive and getting them productive so you have a harvest off of them. In the beginning, your biggest challenges are going to be keeping your plants well fed with enough fertilizer, and then keeping pests and diseases off your plants. So in the beginning, don't be afraid to use some of the products on the shelves at the big box stores, like your soluble fertilizers and pest sprays and fungicides and things like that. Learn to keep your plants alive. Then once you master that, then you can work on more natural and organic means of pest control, disease control, and minimizing your fertilizer practices later on in life. Do not be afraid to use these products up front to learn and get growing. Keep it simple. And that brings me to my second tip. The second terrible piece of advice that you should ignore often given to new gardeners is to avoid fertilizers like these. These soluble fertilizers are probably some of the most misunderstood things on the entire internet when it comes to gardening, and the lies and mythology about them is just enormous. Some people would have you believe that putting something like Miracle-Gro on your garden is like coating it in asbestos, and it just isn't true. In the beginning, it's okay to use products like this to keep your garden fertilized. Something like one $9 box of Miracle-Gro is enough to keep 2 garden beds completely fertilized for the bulk of the growing season. It's not going to hurt your garden, and it's totally acceptable to use products like these, especially when you're first starting out. I relied on products like these to help teach me how to garden. Now I use them a whole lot less because I understand things like composting, and I use more natural and organic means, but you don't need to do that up front. Learn how to grow the things, and then you can slowly wean yourself off products like these as you mature. Most of the lies and myths surrounding soluble fertilizers like this is because they are synthesized out of salts. Because they have a salt content to them, some people would have you believe it's like pouring salts all over your ground, and therefore it's going to poison the soil and poison your plants and nothing is going to grow. And that couldn't be further from the truth. These are mostly myths extrapolated from abuse from large commercial agricultural setups. In enormous commercial farming operations, fertilizers like these are often abused to detrimental effects, and that is true. That's because these commercial agricultural farms need to turn over the soil very, very quickly to produce as much food as possible to be profitable. So because they don't have time to do things like grow cover crops and let their soil rest, what happens is they overly rely on these fertilizers, and they use way too much because as soon as they harvest one crop, they plant the next crop without resting the soil and then just flood them with more and more fertilizer, and that's not a good practice. That isn't at all what we do when we use fertilizers like these in our backyard gardens. We are simply following the manufacturer's recommended dosage of 1 tablespoon per gallon of water and applying it once every other week to give our plants a boost. And something like that spread over all of this surface area is hardly anything. Plus, every single time it rains, it's going to flush any residual salts out of your beds. So it has no negative effect at all. It is not going to harm your garden when used as directed in a backyard setup. It just isn't possible. So don't let these rare cases of commercial companies abuse them influence your decision. That is not what you're doing as a backyard gardener. Nowadays, I don't use a whole lot of soluble fertilizers like these in my actual in-ground garden beds because I've transitioned mostly to organic methods, and I would anticipate you would as well as you gain more experience. However, in the beginning, these are great to help give your plants a boost and make your life a little bit easier. However, if you're a container gardener, you will have to use soluble fertilizers like these pretty much all the time because containers only hold a small amount of soil and a small limited amount of nutrients. So if you're starting your garden in containers, you absolutely have to use some type of soluble fertilizer, so keep that in mind. However, if you still don't want to use fertilizers like these, you can also source them completely organic as well. So there are organic soluble fertilizer options to make life easier. I also have a ton of different organic soluble options linked in my Amazon storefront down in the video description. So you can check that out if you want some organic options. The third terrible piece of gardening advice that new gardeners should avoid is to plant a little bit of everything. That way, something will do well in your garden. Now, look, that is great advice for more advanced gardeners such as myself that has been doing this for a while. That way, it hedges your bets. If, in case you have a really wet season or a really dry season, something will do well. But as a new gardener, you shouldn't be doing that because it can get overly complicated and you will get in over your head. As a new gardener, you should only be focusing on growing a handful of things. That way you can manage them properly and keep it simple. We all want a giant garden overflowing with tomatoes and peppers and zucchini and cucumbers and melons, but all of these plants can be very difficult to manage because they get large and they're very prone to pests and diseases. So if you plant all of these plants without having a lot of experience for managing these pests and diseases, you can wind up getting way in over your head and discouraged and really let down and upset. If you're a new gardener, here is an easy gardening plan to get you started. For your first year, sow radishes, carrots, and leaf lettuce directly into your soil 30 days before your last frost date for your early spring garden. Then, for your summer garden, grow yourself 2 tomato plants, 1 hot pepper, 1 sweet pepper, some basil, and 1 zucchini or cucumber plant, and just learn to manage those. Then around Labor Day, sow yourself some more radishes, carrots, and lettuce for a fall garden. That way you can build your confidence without getting in over your head. Then each year after, add 1 new plant to each seasonal planting, and in a few years you will be a master at growing lots of different things. The fourth terrible piece of gardening advice that new gardeners should avoid is inspired by something that I actually heard an expert gardener give on a radio show, and that was to learn how to compost. That is possibly the worst bit of gardening advice for new gardeners, and there's nothing less important than composting when you're just starting out. Let me explain. I was listening to a radio show and the radio host asked an expert gardener if you were trying to give new advice to someone looking to start out gardening, what should they learn how to do first? And that expert gardener said they should learn how to compost. I don't think there's any worse piece of advice that you could give to a new gardener than to learn how to compost before you start actually growing food. You see this bag right here? This is a $3 bag of organic mushroom compost that I bought at Lowe's. Why would I waste my time making that when I can buy it for $3 when I have more important things to do when I'm just starting out? Now look, I'm not saying not to compost. I compost. I think it's important. And just a couple of weeks ago, I showed you how to make your own $25 homemade composter out of a cheap trash can. And I'll link to that video above so you can see how this thing is performing, because if you want to actually make your own compost, it is great. And it's a wonderful thing we can do. However, I don't compost things in my yard to make all the compost I need for my garden. I just can't do it. And furthermore, compost is not a substitute for fertilizer. They are 2 totally different things. The reason why I compost is because every day I have leftover kitchen scraps and things like leaves and pine needles around the yard that I don't want to just throw away. That's a waste of trash bags. It's a waste of space in landfills. Why would I do that when I can just put it in a composter in my backyard and turn it into rich rich organic matter to use on my garden. It's good for the environment, it's good for your wallet, and it's just a really healthy thing to do overall. Composting is great. However, it can also be very complicated. There can be a lot of moving parts, and it's just not something that you should overwhelm your mind with when you are a new gardener. When you are a new gardener, just worry about keeping your plants alive, and if you need compost to amend your soil, just go to the store and buy yourself a bag. Then when you become better at gardening and you have it all down pat, you can work on being more sustainable and set up these composting systems around your house so you can buy less and also process food waste and use it instead of simply throwing it away. And the fifth and final terrible piece of gardening advice often give to new gardeners that they should ignore is to keep researching before you plant anything. Now look, I'm all about research. I research a lot for these videos that I make. I research a lot on my own time. However, I also have the basics down. And at the end of the day, you are only going to truly learn by doing. That is what is going to stimulate your brain. That is what is going to turn any failures that you have along the way and mistakes you make into actual success. You can read all you want, but until you actually get your hands dirty and start doing, you are not going to truly learn. Yes, it is true that you're going to make mistakes along the way. I've been gardening for probably over 20 years since I was in diapers. I worked on a farm when I was 11, and I still make tons of mistakes. It's going to happen. No matter how experienced we are going to make mistakes. And that is what's so wonderful about gardening. We never stop learning. It always stimulates our minds, and it makes the successes that much more sweet. And that is truly what you need to understand. There is no such thing as failure unless you quit. You only fail if you quit. Otherwise, they're just learning experiences when things go wrong. But wait, I'm going to give you a sixth and final bonus tip. Well, dispel a bonus lie, that is, and that is that gardening is easy. Gardening has never been easy, and it will never be easy. And I know it can look really intimidating when you see all of these YouTube gardeners and you read these internet sites where everything looks so perfect. Trust me, we are all struggling doing something, and there's always stuff that didn't pan out well. So if you make mistakes and you have a crop that flops on you, don't get discouraged by that, because that happens to all of us as well. It's not easy, and that is what makes the rewards so much sweeter. When you actually do very well, you did well because you learned and you put in the time and the effort and work. The best little piece of advice I can give you is to just remember that all of the plants that you plant inside your garden, they all want to survive, they all want to reproduce, they all want to grow. So you're not really controlling the growth. What you're doing is you're just helping them along. Generally speaking, all you need to do is give your plants enough food, enough water, and enough sunshine, and just keep the pests and diseases off of them, and they will basically grow themselves, because that is in their biological best interest. So remember that. And that right there is 5, well, really 6 terrible pieces of garden advice often given by experts to new gardeners that they should ignore. And while I basically gave you 6 different pieces of advice, they all boil down to one thing, and that is to keep things simple. The good rule of thumb when you're just starting out is to ask yourself, is this going to make my life more complicated or simpler? And if the answer is simpler, that is probably what you should do. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when we release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in my garden in real life, they are all linked down in my Amazon storefront link in the video description, so click on that if you want to see what I use in real life. A lot of these products can help you, especially if you're a new gardener. And while you're there, check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. Tonight is New Year's Eve, and we were afraid that there was going to be maybe some fireworks, so we put some CBD oil in Dale's dinner a few hours ago, and I have never seen him so down for the count. He is out. He is twitching and shaking in his dreams. Oh, look at him. I didn't mean to disturb you, sir. I didn't mean to disturb you, sir. He's tripping right now. Luckily, it's drizzling out, so hopefully no one will set off any fireworks tonight, but I don't trust them. There might be some booms, I sure hope not. But if there are, hopefully you're mellow enough right now. Happy New Year, Dale, buddy. Happy New Year, my friend.